to say live in the corner, but it's not live. We are not on any stream at this moment or anything. So, cool. So, David, thank you so much for joining me. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How you doing, Pete?
I'm good. I'm really excited to talk to you and learn about your project. But for those that don't know you, maybe give us a quick little introduction as to who David Ortiz is and what's your Star Wars connection.
So I am 20 years old, and I was born in California. I have been a huge Star Wars fan my entire life. I think the first one I ever watched was The Phantom Menace, if I remember
Mhm.
correctly. And the first one I ended up watching in theaters was Attack of the Clones. And it made such a huge impact on me. And then I went back and watched the original trilogy, and I was like, these are so good. There's no way these are from the 70s and 80s. Uh, and ever since then, I've always been really into anything Star Wars. Whenever something comes out, I always get so excited for it. And it's one of those things that just really defines who you are as a person, at least for myself.
Yeah.
In terms of my storytelling and the way that I express myself in my work and the stuff I like to create. And really, it's what made me want to be a storyteller in the first place in any way possible. I grew up with Shadows of the Empire on the Nintendo 64 when I was a kid. And I remember the countless hours I spent just replaying it because it's my absolute favorite game of all time. And eventually, when I reached university, I think, my second or third year. I was like, you know what? No one is doing this story. No one's talking about it. I see all these other great content creators making amazing fan films. I'm like, you know what? I bet I can make one of my own. So I ended up thinking, like, what's a great story? And then I ended up picking Shadows of the Empire. And I thought, how in the world am I going to do this?
Right.
So I didn't let that bother me. I just wrote the script out for the first episode, and I thought, okay, this is pretty good. So then I didn't really know what to do after that. I didn't know who to go to, where to go. And eventually people just kind of started trickling in, just kind of like, oh, I heard you're doing this, or I heard you're doing that. Just some friends that, would come out, and I didn't know how serious I wanted this to become at first.
Right.
And then eventually I reached this point where I got my first actor who was interested. And it was the guy that's going to be playing Dash Rendar. And I was like, this guy who has done acting before in commercials and stuff, he wants to do this, and I just couldn't believe it. And so I'm like, okay, right. So then I start building everything off of that, off of him being in there. And then so I start a page, and it gets going really well. And then so from that, more people start seeing, like, oh, you have a really cool actor, how can I help?
Right.
And then so I get editors, mixers, and then I get other actors that are like, oh, I know this actor, or oh, this guy, I've seen him before, and so they're like, can I, and then the ball just started rolling from there. And then
So,
oh, no,
so
go ahead.
no, so I'm sorry. So you wrote it. You started by you wrote like one chapter. You wrote it as an episode. Did you write it as like 1 hour episodes? Or the half-hour episodes? How did you go about sort of breaking the story of Shadows of the Empire up?
So I initially wanted to do it as a full length thing, and I'm like, there's no way I could pack that in one sitting and be able to realistically make that in one sitting. So I decided to make each episode about 30 minutes long, 25 to 30 minutes long. And that's the plan, at least. The last one might be a little bit longer than that, just because it's a finale type thing.
Right.
But
And are you pulling it from the so for those that aren't familiar with Shadows of the Empire, Shadows of the Empire was a project that Lucasfilm launched in the mid 90s, and it was sort of a multimedia project. As you said, you grew up with the video game. You made me feel really old when you told me you were 20 years old, and I was writing for Star Wars Galaxy magazine before you were born. And after this, I'm going to take some Geritol and lay down. This is very exhausting. So there was the N64 video game, which was immensely popular. There was a comic book series that went along with it. There was even an original soundtrack that was made, and there was a book by Steve Perry, which was the sort of the centerpiece of it all. But it was this really, at the time, it was kind of not kind of, it was absolutely a new way of doing things. They were trying to tell this story that takes place between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi and fill that gap without a movie. And so that was a really, but doing it through video games, it was sort of like the first quote unquote canon video games. Of course, none of this is considered canon anymore. But so I'm sorry, you were telling me, so you've broken it out into sort of half-hour episodes. Did you? And are you basing it on the book or the comic book or a
So
combination or?
definitely a combination of all three of the main platforms that it was told on.
Mhm.
I've been leaning a little bit more towards the game and the comic line, mostly because the actual book has so much in it that
Mm.
there is no way, like even with the 4 episodes that I have planned or that I would like to do, there's no way I could cover all the material
Yeah.
that is in that book, and that's just the reality of it. And so I was like, okay, let me pick what is the most known aspects of the story,
Mhm.
incorporate different bits from the book, from the comic, from the game, and create something that doesn't contradict with the story, but it is also able to add new aspects to it that, maybe if there's a time jump in this part, you get to see what that time jump was and what took place in between there and so on.
Oh, that's great. So now, are you a filmmaker by trade? Is that what your pursuit is, or is that purely a hobby, or what role does storytelling and filmmaking play in your life now?
It started that way.
Mhm.
I definitely wanted to do it as a career and find my way into the industry in any way I could. I mean, I do sound editing, sound mixing, directing, all the good stuff. And when I was a freshman in university, I took my major was, I think, film editing, and all my professors were really well known. I mean, one of them was the former head of development at Disney, and
Mm.
he was like, you've got some really good scripts, you've got some great ideas as a filmmaker, and as whatever it was that I wanted at the time. And he's like, just keep pursuing it, and we'll help you get there. Um, Unfortunately, some events happened in my personal life that caused me to withdraw from that university,
Mm.
and I had gone into just this creative slump. Um, and I just didn't want anything to do with filmmaking anymore. I didn't want to do anything with storytelling for a good 6 months,
Mm.
until this came back around.
Right.
Um, and so I was like, you know what? This is something that could be really good if I do it right. And it would not only be something for me, but for the cast and the crew to use on their profiles and for
Sure.
their resumes, and something they could be really proud of and be like, I made this.
Mm.
This is really cool. I'm very proud of what I did on this production.
Right. So this is a planned live action production. It would be so you mentioned that you got your Dash Rendar. Do you have your other actors in place?
Absolutely. So we actually just cast our actor, or our 2 actors, for Darth Vader.
Mm.
The voice for Darth Vader is going to be a young man by the name of Ryan Golden. He's fairly new to this scene, and he does an amazing James Earl Jones
Mm.
like impression. He nails it down to the wire.
Hmm.
And the suit actor that we have for Vader is actually Dupree Jones, who played Vader in the Vader fan film and a couple other fan films, and he's pretty well known. I think he's a 501st member as well.
Oh wow.
And so just to have him say, yeah, I'm interested. That sounds cool. And I'm like, we've got Prince Shizor. He is the actor. Again, it's just one of those things where each actor fits it so perfectly that it's almost unbelievable how quick they were to be like, oh yeah, that sounds cool. I'll do it. So yeah, we have, I think, almost all the actors and roles filled. I think there's only a couple extra roles that aren't really filled.
Right.
But for the most part, all our mainline cast is ready to go.
That's great. So it's going to be episodic in form, and you've already started working through some of the special effects, it looks like.
Mhm.
Um, and so when have you started shooting at all at this point?
So that I think is the biggest bane when it comes to this production. Was back in 2019 around August, we were supposed to go out to Dallas, Texas, and film for the cockpit scenes of the Outrider,
Hmm.
there's a pre-constructed set that is an exact replica of the Millennium Falcon, and
Mm.
the Outrider's pretty much the same in that regard.
Yep.
And the guys that own it were amazing. I mean, they take that thing to every convention you could think of.
Yep.
And they were, again, it's one of those things where it's like they were just like, yeah, that sounds cool. Come out and film, you know? And then just, you know, financial stuff came up, and then we weren't able to go. And then we're like, okay, let's go in December. And then I wasn't able to go in December because of personal reasons. And then I was just planning to go during the spring. And then, of course, you know, what's going on in the world now, that's like,
Sure.
well, not going to happen. So it's just one of those things where it's like, it's just hitting you at every angle. It's almost like the world doesn't want it to be filmed. You know, we're pushing against everything to try to get whatever we can.
So what is it? What do you think it is about Star Wars that, I mean, I don't think there is, and I'm not an expert in any other real franchises at all, but what is it about Star Wars that sort of spawns passion projects? I mean, what got me back into what got me into podcasting about a year ago, was I had actually written a novelization of the Phantom Menace and did a fan fiction version of it, where I expanded on certain things and went into different areas, etc. And then just recently, I posted I did a sort of a audiobook of a 5,000 words short story. But there's something about Star Wars that people apply their passion, their excitement about the creative industry too. What do you think drives that? What drove you, and what is it about it that you think a lot of other people kind of get into?
I think what drove me specifically was the adventure. You know,
Hmm.
that there's always a new adventure around the corner. You know,
Hmm.
whatever era of Star Wars it is, whatever character it is, you can make up your own characters and put them in the Star Wars story. That's why, you know, there's so many great media platforms for Star Wars now. I mean, they have tabletop games that immerse yourself into it. They have a theme park now, you know, where you can immerse yourself into that.
Hmm.
And I think since Star Wars came out, it's always been that craving for adventure for me, at least. Um, you know, wanting to tell just a fun adventure of a character, you know, doing something really cool. And then, you know, at least from a fan film's perspective, you know, being able to do nods to, you know, the stuff that we love, and tie it in with these movies and be like, I know that movie, or I know that reference, you know.
Yeah.
But I think for people in general, it's the it's that there's so much in Star Wars. There's
Right.
something for everyone. It doesn't matter what you like or what you dislike. There will always be something for someone. Whether it's the Clone Wars, whether it's the episodic films, whether it's you know, the comic books and so on. I think that's what really brings in this, not only the fan base, but these people to do these passion projects, is that they can feel comfortable knowing that there's I guess you could say, genre of Star Wars for them that
Right.
they can feel comfortable telling their stories in.
Yeah, it seems like what it does is what you're saying is, and I think it's really interesting, is that Star Wars is extremely effective in telling a story that appeals to so many people. And I think that that's probably, what drove the success of the franchise from the outset in the 70s. It's something that you can connect to, whether you're a fan of westerns or traditional science fiction or romance or anything like that. It seems like it pulls on all those pieces, and it sounds like that's what drew you into wanting to tell stories. When you write original stories, what kind of stuff do you are you drawn to?
Definitely sci-fi.
Hmm.
Sci-fi. I have a original audio drama going around that's sci-fi based, and that's typically the genre that I will stick to because it's what I'm most comfortable in. I mean, I love Star Wars, you know, Dune, Star Trek, and just so many different big names in sci-fi that, you know, you really can pick so much out of it that you like.
Hmm.
And that's what I feel most comfortable in, is sci-fi. So I think for me too, it's also the thought of space and exploring the stars.
Hmm.
Again, whichever franchise it is, it's just the thought of that for me particularly is so enticing, and so I always want to tell a story that's based around traveling through the stars and having adventures in them and so on.
That's really cool. Yeah, that I when I was younger, it was a very similar thing. There's something very sort of just it just captures your imagination and it's sort of quote unquote everything anything is possible. And I think that that's what makes it kind of really exciting. So you saw your first exposure to Star Wars was Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones and the prequel trilogy. You then, you got involved. Did you, what you had said at the outset that you were just surprised, and amazed at how well these movies that were made in the 70s and 80s still held up. Did they, what was it about those movies that appealed to you? Was it the same I guess, maybe that whole same sort of thing that's drawn you into, uh, science fiction, but, the which let me ask you this way, which set of films did you like better, the prequels or the trequel or the originals?
Um, I whenever I get asked that question, I say both because my list is very mixed.
Mhm.
My all-time favorite Star Wars film is actually Revenge of the Sith,
Mm.
and my if I had to pick a trilogy, I would pick the original trilogy. So it's really one of those things where I think with the original trilogy, what really kept me interested in it was just this continue or yeah, essentially this continuation of the story that I grew up with.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, they made the sequels to it, but 30 years before, or however many years before, Um, and so I just watch it. And I'm like, oh, it's Anakin's son, and oh, we're gonna follow those adventures, and oh, this is so cool. How is he gonna deal with that? And a lot of people tend to say, oh, you want the Vader reveal first from Empire, and I'm
Mhm.
like, well, growing up with that, it's also very impactful revealing that Anakin turns into Vader in Episode 3,
Yeah.
and so that's why I'm like, oh, that scene for me was like mind-boggling as a kid.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me because when I went back um, and watched the prequels with my daughter before, um, we got into, the sequels, I was concerned that she wouldn't enjoy the films as much because she knew that Anakin was or Darth Vader was Luke's father, but she was actually her biggest reveal was that Sidious and Palpatine were the same person. It was very cool to watch
Yeah.
her response, when he finally reveals himself in Revenge of the Sith, and she looked at me. She said, she was 10 at the time. She looked at me and she said, I knew something didn't seem quite right about that guy. So, but it's great that you really can go into it at any point. But as a Star Wars fan and a budding filmmaker, whether it's behind the camera or at the sound effects desk or mixing or whatever, what was your thoughts on the sequel trilogy when those started to roll out? I guess they started to roll out before you was that before you started to write your Shadows of the Empire project?
Yeah. So The Force Awakens came out, I think I was 15 years old, something like that. 15, 16 years old. Um, and I mean, it was really, really amazing for me. I thought it was great.
Yeah.
Um, Again, it was that callback to Star Wars because, me still being a kid, I was like, oh, it was so fun to have The Force Awakens be there. Um, and then 2 years later, as I get a little bit older, Last Jedi comes out, and for me, I was very on the fence about it. I didn't really hate it or love it. I'm just kind of like, okay, it's there.
Yeah.
um I didn't necessarily have a strong opinion either way. And The Rise of Skywalker came out just recently, and as an adult, for me it almost clicked, like, this doesn't feel the same to me.
Right. Yep.
It felt so different as even 5 years ago when The Force Awakens came out. um and and again, The Rise of Skywalker, I think my favorite of the three would be The Force Awakens.
Mhm.
The Rise of Skywalker it just felt different. I'm not
Yeah.
necessarily saying it was really good or really bad, but it didn't feel the same as when I saw The Force Awakens even, or
Right.
Revenge of the Sith. And to this day, I haven't been able to figure out why that is. I think there's some great aspects or some great points in the film. There's some
Yeah.
great scenes in the film, some great moments. Um, and I'm one of those people where I almost like anything Star Wars. If you
Right.
throw Star Wars on it, I'll just be like, oh, this is great. Um, I tend to see the positives in things more or less than the negative. Um, and to each his own, but that's usually that's my stance on the sequel trilogy is um they're not my favorite, but I definitely see a lot of why people enjoy it, and
Yeah.
there are some definitely enjoyable moments in it. I really do, uh like I said, like The Force Awakens, and I think overall it's not that bad of a trilogy.
Yeah. Yeah. There's I had a guest in the past, a guy named Scott Chernoff who used to be with Star Wars Insider magazine, and he calls the prequel or the sequels fan fiction. And he says, but I mean that in the best possible way. It's like the best possible fan fiction. But I think, and part of it, and I'm with you 100% because I'm still trying to figure it out what it is about the sequels that feels a little bit different to me. It's not that I dislike them. I like them. Force Awakens is probably my top 3 as far as favorite Star Wars films go. But there is a different feel to them, and I think it's because it might be possible partially because it's out of Lucas's hands, right? He's the
Mhm.
original storyteller, and it's kind of moved on beyond him. What are your thoughts on that?
I think for me, at least what's different about it, I look at it, I've seen it as more of a surface level type thing. As someone that has studied cinematography,
Hmm.
I thought that it was just so different in the cinematography sense. The way the cameras are shot and are placed, and it's so different from the prequels in the original trilogy. Granted, the prequels has its own cinematography style as well, but it still
Yep.
captures that same feel that the original trilogy does in a lot of ways. But I felt that the sequels just have this very interesting camera style that
Hmm.
focuses a lot more on either a specific object or a person's eyes or their hands or something, that or a specific moment that's going on, which is a very unique way of storytelling. And I think when it's done effectively, it can be really good. And the sequel trilogy does definitely, like I said, have those moments. But for me, that's what it is. Is it doesn't look the same
Right.
in that sense. And I think the music too for me is very is again very different. It doesn't feel as strong in in the drums or like the timpani, even not necessarily brass, but from a musical perspective, it doesn't feel like it used to.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
there are definitely themes like the March of the Resistance that I absolutely love, and I think and Ray's theme is actually probably my favorite piece of Star Wars music.
Hmm.
But you look at the rest of the sequel trilogy, and a lot of the music just, at least for me, doesn't seem very out there, like Battle of the Heroes or Duel of the Fates and stuff like that.
Yep.
So I think that's the other bit for me. But I mean, like I said, and I just wanted to reemphasize that even though I think they're very different in that
Right.
sense, I still can appreciate them for what they are.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting because I wonder if, and your opinion would be really interesting, is if is it the difference between George Lucas's style, or is it that movie making and blockbuster films are shot differently now? Like there are certain pieces of Rise of Skywalker which I feel have a little bit of Marvel
Hmm.
type cinematic approach. I mean, I'm no film student, but they definitely have more of a there's a you can see that sort of connection. Is it that George was so unique, or is it that there's a certain style that is used more regularly now in movies, in your opinion?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think with George not being on the project, um, there's a certain direction that isn't there anymore.
Hmm.
And even though ultimately at the end of the day it's up to the person on the camera to shoot it in the direction, the person that's doing the direction of the camera, um, the head honcho always has the final word in that. If this
Right.
doesn't look right, they'll be like, no, I want it shot this way. Um, so I think it is a little bit of that, but I also think that definitely there's this new, not new, but there's just this different style that movies are being shot in today, that really are just different from movies from the 2000s era.
Hmm.
that are my favorite ways of shooting movies. I've done countless amounts of papers on why I think Revenge of the Sith is the best shot Star Wars film that there is.
Mm.
Um, and a lot of people have been like, how could you say that? So but and I'm like, I'm not saying that it's it's the best. It's my personal favorite, but there's just this different style that the 2000s films had, in general, in Hollywood in general too. I mean, you look
Yeah.
at Lord of the Rings and all those types of films, and I guess the best way I could describe it is it has a more cinematic type feel than
Yeah.
movies do nowadays. I get that's the only way I could describe it. And I've never been able to truly describe it, but it's just a different feeling. It's just one of those that you can't really explain.
Yeah. So are you you mentioned Clone Wars earlier. Are you a fan of Clone Wars and the Disney Plus content?
Oh, absolutely. I remember when it came out. Was it 2008 when the movie came out?
Hmm.
I remember not a lot of people liked it, but me being a 9-year-old kid,
Right, sure.
I went in with my clone trooper helmet and everything, and back in the day when you could do that,
Right.
and I thought this is the best thing ever. As a kid, like this is so cool. And then when I heard that they're gonna have a show for that, a Star Wars show, like what, um, so then I remember every Friday at I think it was 9 p.m.
Hmm.
I'd always tune in on the show, turn on the TV after I do all my homework and everything. And I think the best thing about the Clone Wars was that it grew up with me.
Right.
And that's why a lot of people still like it today, is because the show catered to a specific audience during that time. And as that audience matured and got older, the show kind of followed them instead of just stagnating where it was.
Right.
And so you have where it is today with Disney Plus, where it has such beautiful animation, like nothing I could comprehend 10 years ago.
Right.
And I think for example, the Bad Batch arc is one of my favorite arcs in the entire show. It was one that I had been looking forward to when I remember they canceled it.
Right.
And it's such great content. I went to the to San Diego Comic-Con when they had revealed it. And I remember being in the front row.
Hmm.
It was so surreal, being in front of these stars that I was like, I I saw that person as a kid, and seeing Dave Filoni up there answering my questions and stuff. I'm like, my one of my idols in Hollywood, or in storytelling in general,
Hmm.
is answering a question that I'm directly asked. So you get a little starstruck there, and
Sure.
uh,
What did
you
you
know,
ask him? I gotta ask you. What did you ask him?
I had asked him about what episodes that they were going to be bringing. I think this is something like that. It was something about what episodes they were going to be bringing, or something related. I don't remember. That moment was just such a
A
blur
blur,
because I
right?
was so excited. I'm sure I had stuttered a few times and took about 5 minutes to actually ask him the question. But again, it's just one of those things where it's so unreal when you meet these people. And then I met Ashley Eckstein off the panel.
Hmm.
She was really nice. We had a small conversation. She's like, "Oh, you looking forward to the show?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And she's just like asking, "What's your favorite part about the show?" I'm like, "This person's real." I never would have expected someone like her to just come up and be like, "Hey, how you enjoying the convention?"
Yeah.
Um, so and I think that's what's about the Clone Wars also that appeals to me so much, is
Mhm.
that to an extent I know the people behind the voices, and I've met them, and it's just a lot of people say don't meet your heroes, don't meet your idols, but in this case I'm really glad I met them, because then it really solidified my preference in the Clone Wars as one of my actually my favorite show of all time.
Yeah,
But
you made a really interesting observation about how the story grew up with its audience, and I was it was a weird 2008 was a weird time for me from a Star Wars perspective, in that I was always a fan, but I just never it was a weird time to watch Star Wars on Cartoon Network, I guess was what it was at the time, and it was um I never really followed it, and I think it was because the Clone Wars film, I mean, I'm now one of the biggest Ahsoka fans, just from a storytelling perspective. I think she's
mhm,
an amazing character. She's just she embodies a lot of what Star Wars is all about. But I remember, I readily admit it's not the popular statement, but I did not like her as a character in that film, and I kind of checked out. And
mhm,
you can see that not only did it grow up during the time that you watched it, and because now I've caught up on a lot of it, almost all of it, most of it. I've watched all the major arcs, but I've been watching this series every single day, every single Friday when it comes out, and looking forward to it, not missing it, and realizing it is, because I have a 7-year-old son who, like you, when you saw the Clone Wars movie, he's a huge Clone Wars fan. He's Clone Troopers are like his thing.
Mhm.
My thing when I was a kid, I loved Stormtroopers. He loves Clone Troopers, and but even the last couple of Ahsoka stories, I mean, the amount of dead Pikes left in their wake is pretty
Yeah.
intense for a quote unquote cartoon, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I remember, when I had started watching this last specific arc, I'm like, okay, there's a lot of buzz going around about it, and I'm like, I it's Clone Wars, it's
Yeah,
enjoyable. I don't mind it, all that much. I can definitely see some complaints about it, but for the most part, I enjoyed it. And then, seeing certain scenes, like actual scenes that happen in this arc, where like a Pike gets smashed by a conveyor thing, and it's like they kept this in here. It really
yeah,
surprised me, and it kind of made me happy. Not in a sadistic way, but it made me happy in the sense that they didn't just because Disney, quote unquote. Um, and that was, I'm going to be honest, that was something that I had feared. But after seeing, The Mandalorian
mhm,
and, stuff like that, I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to be afraid of that, because I know that if they purposely did that, like blatantly, they'd never, ever, ever hear from anybody. They'd never hear the end of it. I mean, I know they're not hearing the end of a lot of things right now, but, that's just like something you don't do. It's almost like the character of Anakin. You don't mess with that, as
right.
much as, um, so I thought, okay, that was cool. That was great. I really liked that fourth episode in the arc. It felt like a prelude to the Siege of Mandalore. I just did a video on this, but it's just how this entire arc shows two different perspectives. It gives a really good perspective for Ahsoka, and you know how the rest of the world sees the Jedi in a similar way that she kind of does.
Right.
And it's something that she can try to relate to. And while that's going on, she has to remember that, you know, how do I go about creating a relationship with these people without, exposing myself, and, without judgment. And I think it bears an important lesson with, you know, don't, um, don't let other people define you. Don't, and also don't judge other people for who they are,
Right.
and what their past is, because you don't know the type of person that they really are. So I thought, as usual, this arc had a lot of great life lessons and just kind of moral stuff that the Clone Wars always had, and I thought it was a great arc. I didn't really have too many complaints about it.
Yeah, it's been great to revisit these characters. Specifically, I've enjoyed, again, now as somebody who's become a huge Ahsoka fan, to watch her making some of her own decisions for the first time, and
Mhm.
and really kind of dealing with that. And so I'm excited to see where that goes. And speaking of seeing where things go, you also mentioned Mandalorian. I imagine you're a fan of that as well. What are your thoughts on that series?
I thought The Mandalorian was amazing. I felt like a little kid when that first episode premiered. I remember I was up at midnight. I had my snacks, I had my drink and everything in my chair, and just having that intro, to the show start, I was like, I felt like this little kid again. I
Yeah.
felt like this little kid sitting in the movie theaters watching Clone Wars, watching Revenge of the Sith, and the entire time the whole world just shut off to me. I swear my phone probably rang about 8 times from someone calling, and I didn't hear it, and it was on full blast. Um, and I think with the Mandalorian, it's also that it's just something new. It's nothing we've seen really in an era that we kind of know, but it's not. That's not even what's the important part. And I think that to me is what makes it enjoyable, is that it's not necessarily worried about the time period it's in and what's going on around everything. And it's focusing on a central story about a character or two characters, and the journeys and adventures that they go through.
Hmm.
It's very much like how I felt about Solo. I know not a lot of people really enjoyed that film, but from an adventure standpoint, I thought it was fun.
Hmm.
I didn't I never went into it thinking that it was going to be super serious. I just kind of shut my brain off, be like, all right, I'm just going to enjoy this like a little kid.
Right.
And I enjoyed it. Sure, there's problems with it, but overall, I thought it was fun. And
Yeah.
I went into that same mentality with the Mandalorians, in the Mandalorian, and my expectations were exceeded. I thought it was like, again, one of the best things ever.
Mhm.
And so to have a live action Star Wars series, official Star Wars series, be that good, it just made me really happy, and I was really excited when they announced that season 2 would be coming out this year.
Yeah, yeah, it's such a fun show, and you make an interesting observation about, I think Star Wars works well when there's just enough of a flashback to things we're familiar with. Don't hit us over the head with it, but put it in a place that we're comfortable with, but tell us something new. And um, I think that's why Mandalorian works. It all feels, I think the way it was described and is 100% true is Filoni and Favreau opened up their toy box and just played, and those are the stories we told when we were kids growing up,
Mhm.
just making these things up. And so, speaking of which, back to Shadows of the Empire, have you talked to and shared your story and some of your concepts and things with people who, because there are people who it's a group of people who are very who love Shaz the Empire. They're very possessive of that story. Have you had the opportunity to show or share any of that of your content with people who are in that mindset? I mean, I was a giant fan of that series when I was younger.
Yeah,
Not as young
absolutely.
as you, of course. I mean,
Yeah.
you weren't born yet, but
Yeah. When I started my Facebook page, I had, done everything I can to expose it to the right people to start out. And a lot of the people that I noticed that comment and then consistently follow the updates that I post are these possessive people that are like, I
Mhm.
grew up with the book as a kid, or I grew up with the game as a kid, and I really want it to be like this, and I really want it to be like that. And you can't please everybody, but for the most part, you know, all these people, whether they're casual or they're hardcore Star Wars fans, and more specifically Shadows of the Empire, fans like I am,
Mhm.
the response has been amazing. I
Yeah.
never would, when I post something, I always get so scared, like, what is the reaction going to be? Are people
Right.
gonna like hate this and be like, oh, this looks really bad and whatever? Um, and whenever I just post it, I just turn myself off from it for the rest of the night or whatever. And then I look back in the morning and I see like there's 80 likes and like 80
Mm.
people saying like, oh, this is so cool, bring
Yeah.
on Shadows of the Empire, and then you get the people that are like, oh, well, I wish you had this, or oh, I didn't really like this. And instead of just kind of ignoring it like a lot of people tend to do, which again, not taking criticism to heart is a good thing. But I think accepting that and replying to any negative feedback, even if it is ludicrous feedback, I think responding to that in a very professional manner and in a way that is helpful to both you and the audience, is vital. I just had
Right.
someone, that said, "Oh, well, I was very disappointed because I thought there was going to be actual footage," and then, and then I tell them like, we animated all these scenes with VFX. Because of the situation that's going on right now, we can't actually go film anything, but we have pictures of pre-built sets. We have all these things, and I told him, if you have any other suggestions, let us know. And then he responded a good hour later. And he's like, I looked through everything that you posted, and I'm actually really excited for this now because this looks really cool after everything I've seen. So for the most part, people that, have these negative feedbacks, or, even just ridiculous comments sometimes, are just unsure, in my
Yeah.
opinion. I think a
Yeah.
lot of them are just very unsure about what you're putting out there. And it, again, no matter what, you cannot take it to heart. And that's something I could not do 2 years ago. If
Yeah.
someone would have done that 2 years ago, I would have, been really upset and, been like, how come one person doesn't like it, instead of focusing on why 300 people like it.
Right.
So now for me, it's just one of those things where I want to reach out to every person that doesn't like something I do, so I can ask them, why didn't you like it? I respect that you didn't like it. Why didn't you like it? Because then
Right.
I want to improve myself. Um, so that's kind of where I'm at now. And I think that that's important. But no, like you said, um, the response for this has been amazing, and it's just one of those things where I don't really know what else to do at this point in terms of exposure,
Right.
because I reach out to people, and I understand that I know that you guys have like chock full schedules, and me starting content now, I understand what that's like, making content almost every day, and then you see something that's really cool, you might want to work with this person or collaborate with this person, but you're just so tight on your schedule, and sometimes you think, oh, I'm going to respond to this person, and you
Right.
forget to. And it's just one of those things where it's like, when you're on the other side of that, you have to understand that people are busy, and so patience is definitely key. And um I don't know, I'm at the point where I just want to keep throwing this out to whoever I can, and eventually reach the most people that I possibly can, so that this becomes one of the most noticed Star Wars fan endeavors that have been made.
Hmm.
That's the goal. If it doesn't get to that, that's quite all right with me. But that's the goal anyway.
Have you now I can't think of the what's that Darth Vader fan film done by Star Wars
Oh,
Theory?
Shards of the Past, I believe it
Shards of
was
the
called.
Past. Have you what are your have you reached out to him at all, or to understand some of because I think that's sort of the bar I think that's been set. I'm not a fan film expert, but I enjoyed
Mhm.
that. That's sort of the bar I think, um, as far as what people might compare things to. Have you spoken to him at all?
I haven't had the chance to speak with him yet directly, but like I said, we got Dupree Jones, who was the actor for Vader in his fan
Right.
film. So, that was a big step forward. And, I know having him will grant us more exposure along the way. But, it's been one of those things where, getting to these people that have such high influence, it's less about me getting into contact with them so that they promote it, and more just so that they know about it.
Sure.
I'm not really trying to contact people to be like, share this now, because you should. For me, it's more about, hey, I know you have a big voice in the Star Wars community and that you have great opinions. Would you mind checking this out? Tell
Right.
me what you think about it. And, from there, they can decide what they want to do. Um, but like I was saying, that's my ultimate goal, is to reach those people like Star Wars Theory and Eckhart's Ladder and Star Wars Explained. Um,
Hmm.
those types of people that are way up there, so they can, it's just one of those validating feelings where you kind of, if they like it, it's like, oh, okay, you know. And I've done a great job of building my way up. I mean, I've gotten on a couple shows. I've been on here. I've been on the Rebel Scum Network. I've had shout outs from Hello Greedo, ATHE Chat, and a few other people. And so it's growing. And I just need to keep reminding myself every day just to be patient, because it'll be there. It'll be
Yeah.
there if I just keep pushing, if I keep working hard, and I keep doing my best to make this what it can be.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's great. Well, I'm excited about it because, as I mentioned, I was a huge Shadows of the Empire fan. I gotta hook you up with my friend Steele Saunders, who he and I are of that same sort of love of Shadows of the Empire. I think he'd love to talk to you as well. He's actually he and I kind of went back a little bit back and forth when we saw the trailer. We were both like, "Oh, we got to see this. We got to see this come out." So before I get to the 10 question section, if you don't mind, I want to share for the people who are going to be able to watch this on video. I want to share your I guess just under a minute sort of preview, if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely.
Give that a run and hope for the best whenever I do something on video. I just have to hope it works well. Let's see.
There is a great disturbance in the Force. You will join us or die, Master.
Whoops, I can't wait for that to come along, man. So that's just got to get through this crazy coronavirus thing so you can actually get to shooting.
Yeah.
um, so I warned you before you got on with me that we do this with every one of my guests. I do a little 10-question thing. Some of the questions I think you've already answered, but we'll ask them again for the record. But 10 questions, are very similar to Inside the Actor Studio. And let me fire them at you. There's no right or wrong answer, and there's no such thing as too long or too short of an answer for it. So
All right.
let's start at the top. What is your favorite Star Wars movie, TV show, or book?
If I had to pick my favorite piece of Star Wars material, it would definitely be. Oh, that's tough. Now that I think about it, it would definitely be Shadows of the Empire, because it covers most grounds, and it's just, again, one of those that I grew up with. And as you get older, you can appreciate other aspects of it, and it's what I'm campaigning for right now. So
Yeah,
I
if you,
definitely say
I
that.
think if you said anything else, you would have lost a lot of credibility. I'm just saying. The next question is, what is your least favorite Star Wars TV show, movie, or book?
I think my least favorite Star Wars material out there would probably be. Ooh. See, that again, an even harder question. I don't like to pick a lot of these, because it's hard to focus on that type of question for me.
Yeah.
But I definitely think The Rise of Skywalker is the weakest for me.
Mhm.
Just because it for me, it lacks a certain consistency that I saw from The Last Jedi, at least, whether or not I liked or disliked The Last Jedi.
Yeah.
That got to me. It felt a little too just different in a lot of ways, and at the
Okay.
same time, it felt like it was trying to be Star Wars.
Right.
Like I said before, there's a lot that I really like about it, but I definitely would have to say that's my least favorite.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard question because, as Jason Fry, who wrote the Last Jedi novelization, when he was on the show, he said, whichever, I can't remember which one it was. He might have said Attack of the Clones. He said it was his. At the time, there were 10 Star Wars movies. He said it was his 10th favorite. So, as you said, I mean, there's enough that yeah, it basic physics, something has to fall to the bottom of the list, right? So
Yeah.
it's all right. Would you consider yourself an Imperial or a Rebel?
As cool as being an Imperial would be, because you get shiny armor and fancy ships, I think morally I'd have to be a rebel.
Yeah, it's hard to go any other way. Although you're right, Imperials do have all the cool toys, right? So, as a sound guy, I'm really interested in your answer to this one. What's your favorite Star Wars sound effect?
Ooh. I think it would have to be either the no, I know what it is. It is the seismic charge from Attack of the Clones.
Very cool. Yeah.
It's one of the most unique sounds out there, and just the utter silence and then the boom that follows after. It's such a satisfying sound almost. To have the silence, and you're waiting and waiting and waiting, and then the boom. And I think that's probably my favorite piece of audio.
It's definitely one of those sound effects that it does a rare thing in that it brings a smile to your face. I remember when I first saw the film, and it did that giant twang. I just remember being like, there was a sense of joy and excitement to it, which is really cool. So yeah, that's a great one. All right, which droid would you prefer? I left Lebo off the list. He wasn't quite there yet. But which droid, R2D2, C3PO, or BB-8? Which is your favorite?
I think R2D2. He has the most personality, in my opinion, when it comes to how he can phrase himself. And I don't know. I think he's the cutest. I think the original always wins. As cute as BB-8 is, I think R2. It would just be cooler to have an R2 unit, just because he's a little bit bigger, and you run along with him through all the films, and he almost has a different way of saying things in every film, and I at least kind of relate to that. So I definitely pick R2.
Cool. Yeah, it's interesting you say that because they keep enough R2 familiar sound effects, but always add to his sort of his language every time you see him. Something a
Mhm.
little bit new, but definitely recognizable. That's cool. All right, what spaceship or vehicle from the Star Wars universe would you most like to own?
Um, Probably Slave One.
Ooh,
Um,
good one.
it's so different compared to really any other ship. It has a really cool sound when it shoots.
Mm-hmm.
It has the seismic charges in the back, and it's just it's one of those ships where it speaks awesome. It's just the sound that it makes when it zooms by, and it kind of begs you to take it out and show it off to everybody type thing. At least for me.
That's cool. Now, are you a Boba Fett guy?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I am I know this is slightly off topic, but I am hoping against hope that Boba Fett shows up in season 2 of The Mandalorian. I'm of the mindset of the fan theory that he showed up at the end of that one episode where all you saw were the boots
Yep.
near Fennec Shan. So I don't know. What do you think?
I,
You think he's there?
I 100% think that it was him.
Yeah.
I just, and again, I'm not like the biggest Boba Fett guy out there, but when I heard that sound that plays when he walks around, and I heard the
Yep.
spurs and the boots,
Yep.
and I'm like, they're cutting away from it. I'm like, oh, we know that's him. That's got to be him. That's what I thought at least. But yeah, no, definitely. I think I hope that it'll be in there. It'll be an interesting dynamic to see. If Boba Fett plays as the opposite to Din Djarin, and how they could be opposites in that sense.
Yeah, it would be interesting because you take the franchise fans' two favorite bounty hunters and sort of put them against each other, which would be kind of cool too. All right, of these three, which one is your favorite? A Porg, an Ewok, or Jar Jar Binks?
It's got to be the Porgs.
Yeah.
I mean, they're adorable, man. I don't care what anybody says. I mean, that scene in The Last Jedi where Chewbacca's eating one and they're all looking at him sad. That really got me. I got so sad when I saw that, and so I just they're just too cute beyond belief. And again, I don't care what anybody says. I think they're freaking adorable.
They're pretty awesome. I am Team Porg for sure. If you could be any character in the Star Wars universe, who would it be and why?
I'm gonna break away from Shadows of the Empire here a little bit, but definitely Darth Revan.
Oh wow.
I am a very big Old Republic and Knights of the Old Republic fan as well.
Mhm.
It comes up as a close second to Shadows of the Empire. I have a whole show dedicated to Revan. So he's right up there. But he has such an interesting life, and in my opinion, he's really one of the only Jedi that understood what it truly meant to be balanced. Sure, he was unbalanced at different times. He fell, he was redeemed, and he fell. But at the end of the day, he understood that you could be a Jedi without being ignorant. You could be a Jedi and utilize the Force in its entirety. And so, from a more magical and Force aspect, that's why I really like the Old Republic, because it really expands on that. Not to get off topic, but definitely
Yeah.
it would be Revan.
Oh, that's really cool. Now, are you looking forward to the High Republic series that's on its way, or how do you
I
feel
haven't
about that?
I haven't seen a whole lot about it. Only just kind of the buzz that goes around about the. It's funny. I don't like the negativity of anything, but that's
Right.
all that I see is the negativity or the
Yeah.
criticism. For what I've seen, I don't really have enough of an opinion on it to say either way. I definitely need to see more of what is going to be there. Um, I personally think that it's a little too close to the Phantom Menace. 200, or how is it, 200 years?
I think so. Yeah, I want to say yeah.
To me, that just feels a little too close, but
Yeah.
there's a lot you could do in that time, and I think if you focus on a story that isn't about the greater universe, kind of like you do with the Mandalorian, I think you can get something that's really good. So I guess I just have to wait and see until they come out with more stuff.
Yeah, it is hard to tell, and it is kind of, I have sort of this Shadows of the Empire feeling about it in that it's a different way to tell a Star Wars story. So it's either going to land really well with people or not. Because there are people who were like, "Yeah, Shadows of the Empire, I never picked that up. I never even got into it." So it's going to be in that same
Mm-hmm.
kind of vein. So I think you answered this already, but your favorite trilogy, original, prequels, or sequels?
Favorite trilogy as a whole would definitely be the original trilogy.
Hmm.
Just because it just in every way it nails it, and it's so special, and it's what made Star Wars happen. It's what made it so successful, and
Right.
uh, there's I could go on and on and on about why it's so great, but it would be the original trilogy for sure.
Awesome. And the last question on this list is, what is your favorite Star Wars quote?
Hmm. Um.
It's never an easy one. Well, actually, that's not true. Some people, they have it at the ready, and some people, because there's so many good ones.
Yeah. I think. I think the "I am your father" line is my favorite quote. Not necessarily to quote myself, but more just the implications behind it and just the reveals that it does, and the shock that Luke's face has, and just again, even though if you whether or not you know it beforehand, it's a line that James Earl Jones delivered so just well, and
Right.
it's something that you can't replicate no matter what. And so that line always stuck with me when I think of Star Wars. If I were to think of a quote, I would think of the "I am your father" line. And that would just kind of almost give me chills just thinking about that line, because it's so impactful and it's so well done.
That's perfect. That's great. That's great. And it's always a great question to end with, because I think it sort of gives a little bit of insight into the way people take a look at the Star Wars saga. And so, thank you for spending time with us today. What where tell people where they can find you and where they can follow along the progress of your film and your channel, where people are getting videos from you on a regular basis.
Sure. So you can check out my Twitter if you are on there. It's at SW_Beyond. My YouTube channel is Star Wars Beyond. And the Facebook page for Shadows of the Empire is SOTE series on Facebook. But you can follow any of those three, and there will always be constant updates on the production and what we're going to need to do, and all the fun things that we'll have planned for you guys. And but yeah, no, I mean it's been great being able to do something like this, and thank you for having me on. It's really great to have people help you out when you're not only doing a project, but when you're starting out as a content creator,
Hmm.
because this is something I'm going to want to do almost every day, and
Yep.
get up there and have again, the goal is to be a household name, in the Star Wars YouTube community, and we'll get there one day if we push hard enough. So, um, but yeah, and again, it's one of those things where I'm really grateful for everybody's support and you know moving along with us.
That's awesome. Well, great. Well, best of luck to you. Not only do we want to get through this horrible pandemic situation so that we can get life back to normal and we can keep people healthy and happy, I want you to be able to get back to work on this project. I'm really looking forward to it, and I will be following your progress through social, and definitely keep in touch. And when you get a little closer to having the film finished, I'll have you back on again, and we could talk about your progress. I'd love to have you back.
Absolutely, I'd love it.
Awesome. Well, thanks again.
Thank you.